Greetings, Butterfly Tribe, and welcome back to The Way You See Me Heart Healing Ministry. Today we're going to resume with part 6 of Healing Childhood Trauma. Healing Childhood Trauma. Yesterday we reached to my elementary years of school between the 1st and the 5th grade, anywhere between the ages of about 5 to about 10. And I was going to move forward, but as I continue to dedicate the time to expound on these things, more things come to memory. And today I want to focus on how we become afraid of certain things, where our fears come from. The Bible says, I have not given you the spirit of fear, but one of power, love, and a sound mind. So where do we get the idea of fear, the concept of fear? It comes in many different ways. For me, I'm going to expound on a couple of great fears that I have. The first one being of water, of drowning. I have a fear of drowning. As a little girl, I remember going to the pool, the community pool, with my siblings and my father. And I enjoyed water. I enjoyed playing in the pool with the other kids. One day, I was at an uncle's house. This uncle, no matter where he lived, always had a swimming pool. And the nieces and nephews would gather at his house for family events, and he would allow us to play in the pool. Well, on this particular day, as we were playing in the pool, I was sitting on the side, and my uncle threw me into the pool. And I went under the water and felt like I was drowning, like I could not get back to the top. I don't think he meant to harm me, but I lost that sense of trusting people around water. So until today, I'll get in a pool, but I have to be able to walk. I will only go as far as I can walk in it. I will not submerge my head underneath the water. Until this day, I have a fear of even learning to swim because of that fact, because I know that is an area that I have to accomplish, is putting my head underneath the water, and it's very fearful. I'll give you an example. I coached my daughter's AAU team, and the other coach and I took our team to Blue Bayou, which is a water park here in Louisiana. And I was on the lazy river with some of the teammates, just having a good time. And one of the young ladies thought it was a good idea to hold the inner tube that I was floating in under water that was pouring over my head. And I held my breath as long as I could, and then I began to panic. Now, to some people, they're like, that's simple. No, that brought me a lot of anxiety. And what seems to be a joke for some people is serious for other people. And for me, it was serious. That's a serious anxiety I have. And so I explained to her my reaction. I didn't try to fight her or anything. They were laughing because of my response to my head being held under that water. But even until today, I cannot shower with water running over my head. Everybody has their different fears, but I know that that's where my fear came from, was being thrown into that water and feeling like I was drowning. Another fear I have is of heights, but I didn't always have that fear either. And the reason I know that is because my grandfather incorporated his grandchildren into a lot of different things. He taught the boys and girls how to cut the yard, how to cut the grass, how to weed eat. He also would allow us to, my grandfather built his house from the ground up. And so anytime that they needed repairs or anything to the roof in my younger years, my grandfather and his children, his sons, would do all the work on the house. Well, he would allow us to climb up the ladder and bring him things if he needed. And I had no fear of climbing up a ladder and getting on top of a house, or climbing in trees playing with my cousins and other kids in the neighborhood. But at some point, I began having a fear of heights. Then until today, I don't know where that fear came from. But one thing I do know is that the Most High did not give us the spirit of fear, but one of power, one of love, and of a sound mind. So maybe someday I'll attack those fears. Those fears still exist today, and maybe some way have limited things that I could have experienced in my adult life because of those fears. But I wanted to address that fear it can sometimes come from traumatic events, things that have traumatized us or left from a bad experience that left a very, very real fear of death. So you avoid those things. I lived a very active childhood. Some would call me a tomboy, but I wasn't. I mean, I guess I was, but I was well-rounded because I wore dresses and church shoes and heels. I dreamed of, I read fairy tales, so I had the heels and dressed like Cinderella and Barbie or the princesses. But part of me wanted to be outside playing basketball and running and jumping. And, I played hopscotch and double dutch. I played all the little hand games that little girls play. So I was well-rounded in my childhood. I always knew my identity as a girl, but I did not allow that to limit my physical activities. I played with the boys. I went outside and played basketball with the boys, ran and raced against the boys. I jumped rope, and, all a sense of identity of who we are as children come from things we see. The stories we're told, whether it's fairy tales, the fairy tale movies we saw, the experiences. My mom played softball along with my aunties and my uncles. They were very active. We would have softball tournaments for our church. A lot of that goes into who I grew up to be, even as a woman to this day, with the activities that I choose to participate in. What other childhood memories can I share? Also at that age, between the ages of 9 and 10, there was a festival that was introduced to the community that I lived in. And we would go to this festival yearly, sometimes with our parents and sometimes on our own, because it's such a small community. It was held at our city park. And so we were old enough to go walk to the city park and come home. So I played this game and won a baby rabbit. Beautiful white, snow white rabbit with pink ears. I was so proud of myself. I brought it home in the box that they gave me, along with the rabbit food that they gave me. And I was so proud. I brought it home, and my mom allowed me to keep it in our utility room. And I had the baby rabbit for a couple weeks. Well, one day when I went to school, they came to do the monthly insect spraying of our apartment. And when I got home from school, my rabbit was dead. in the box, and it broke my heart, crushed me. That was my first experience with having a pet and losing a pet. But until this day, I have a love for rabbits, and that was only the first one. I want another rabbit later, and I'll tell you that experience. I brought it home. My mom allowed me to keep it, and for some reason, she sprayed the house. Not realizing, I think it's just unintentional, not realizing that the fumes were not safe for the pet. And that rabbit died. That was the only two pets that I've had in my childhood. For that reason, I didn't want any pets. I was always afraid of dogs. We ran from dogs. I didn't want to be anywhere near dogs. So that never was one of my things, was to want pets. So that was my first experience with death, was the pet rabbit. But I loved animals because there was near our local store, which was George Terrio's at the time, there was a feed store. And so you'd go inside the feed store and they would have baby chicks and ducks. And so we would go in and we would play with them. They were really, really cheap, so you could buy them. We would buy them, but we wouldn't keep them as pets. We would feed them and just let them roam freely. But until now, I can still remember the smell of the feed store where we would go and play with the little chicks. So again, I learned at a young age to have an appreciation and a love for nature, for things outside of humanity that the Most High created. I loved nature. I loved being outside. I loved picking berries and picking plums. You know, a lot of people had fruit trees, plums, and my auntie had a fig tree. So we would pick figs. We would climb up in her tree and pick figs. Some families had orange trees, apple trees. So I just learned to love and appreciate nature and the fruitfulness of it. My childhood, like I said, seems pretty normal, right? This is also the age group, and I'm going to save the majority of that story for the next recording. But this is the age group where I saw adults moving what we would call today shady. They would say one thing and do something else. They lied, and children were expected to keep their secrets. So again, not as in the sense of them doing anything to you and telling you to keep it a secret, but you watching them do things that were shady and being expected not to say anything, to stay in a child's place. This is the age group where I believe trust in people begin to be a little shaky. You love people and you watch them, but then you watch them break that trust, and they expect you to go back to everything just being normal because you're a child. But children need to learn that when adults say something, that they can hold them to it, or else we become adults and it becomes normal for people to promise you things or to do things and say things and then do the opposite, and you just forgive them because that's what's been taught to you. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not by any means telling you not to forgive someone. What I'm telling you is that we need to learn as children to judge the tree by its fruit. In other words, if you say something, I should see that in your life. I shouldn't just be hearing things because I'm a child and told to accept it or do as I say and not as I do. Children will do what they see. We will not do what we're told. We're going to do what we see other people do. We imitate the behavior of the adults and other children that we look up to in our lives. So again, childhood is filled with so much good and bad. And the reason that I want to include both the good and bad memories is because you have to learn to separate them. A lot of people will treat you harshly or badly, and then they're going to come and they're going to throw good in to throw you off, to offset the bad that they've done. It's almost like a reward system. I'm going to hurt you and then I'm going to give you something and you're going to feel better. I'm going to hurt you, then I'm going to give you something and then you're going to feel better. But what about the hurt? When are we going to address the hurt? When are we going to address the damage? When are we going to address the trust that was broken? And how do we rebuild that trust based on consistent behavior that matches what you are saying? That's why you see me including both the good and bad memories. Because again, we do not have to be abused in our childhood directly to be conditioned to either be abusers or to normalize being abused. I'm going to conclude this one here, and then our next recording, we will go deeper into it, because it's important for us to go through these childhood healing stages. We must go back and heal the children within ourselves that somehow lost their voices. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me for part 7 of Healing Childhood Trauma.